Hello and welcome to Psychology 101. This is your instructor, Michelle Courgette, and I am so glad that you will be joining me this semester in learning the basics of psychology. We're going to jump right in today with our first lecture. Your learning objectives, you have two of them for this lecture. You will begin to learn about the historical figures of psychology, along with differentiating between structuralism and functionalism. Those terms might seem like a foreign language, but by the end of this video, you will have a basic understanding of each. So let's start with the basic question that is really opening Pandora's box. What is psychology? Well, psychology basically seeks to understand behavior and mental processes and apply that understanding to promote human welfare. To begin to explore what is included in both behavioral and mental processes, I want you to take a moment and think about this question. Who are you? You know what? Pause this video for just a minute and write down your answer. Okay, did you get it? Well, did you describe your personality? Maybe you described your accomplishments or skills. Did you describe your interests and goals? Or maybe you identified yourself based on your culture or your intelligence. Did you identify yourself based on a physical or emotional problem that bothers you? You could have listed dozens of qualities about yourself, and every one would reflect some aspect of either behavioral or mental processes. Behavior is what can be observed. According to those labeled as what we call behaviorists, if you can't see it or measure it, it doesn't exist or it doesn't count. Mental processes, on the other hand, include internal processes such as thinking, feeling, and desiring that can be only indirectly observed. What's indirect observation, you might ask? Well, basically it's you describing how you feel about something. So let's ask this question. What is this goal of psychology? Well, let's start by identifying what it is not. It is not confirmation bias, which is the tendency to search for information that confirms our preconception. In other words, it is not trying to prove that you are right. But what psychology is, what its goal is, it actually has four goals. Its four goals are to, number one, describe what is happening. Number two, explain why is it happening. Number three, predict, hey, when will it happen again? And number four, control, can it be changed? Let's use the example of Joey, okay? So Joey is a 6-year-old boy who continues to get into trouble during recess at school. We first ask the question, well, what is happening? After talking to Joey for a little while, we learn, what really gets him mad is when other kids don't play games by the rules. Why is this happening? Well, according to Joey, the kids are bad when they don't follow the rules. What we find out really is Joey just tends to be very rigid and tends to like rules. He knows the expectations, and if it's outside of the rules, it's outside of his control. Rules tend to be really important to Joey. So when will this happen again? Well, it will probably happen next time Joey wants to play with other 6-year-olds because they either don't understand Joey's rules or they just don't care. So how can we change this? How can we control it? According to Joey, we can teach every kid on the playground the correct way to play these games. But that seems highly unrealistic. So instead, why don't we work on giving Joey tools and how to cope with not having rules always followed, or how to handle his anger or frustration when others around him don't meet his expectations. So that is psychology's goals. Let's now move on to the who's who in psychology. The official birth date of modern psychology is usually given as 1879 when Wilhelm Wundt established the first psychology research laboratory at the University of Leipzig in Germany. At the time, other researchers were focused on sensory and perceptual processes. Wundt used the study of sensory perceptual systems, but focused his work on consciousness, which is the mental experiences created by these systems. Wundt wanted to describe the basic elements of consciousness, so he trained his research participants to describe the sensations and feelings that the stimuli of light or sound made them feel. He called this objective introspection. Now you might ask, if he trained these participants to describe in detail the processes going on inside their head, were they any good at it? The answer was simply no. In fact, they were terrible at it, as anyone would be. I mean, how accurately and completely could you use words to explain the process taking place in your brain when you think, see, hear, or feel? Even though Wundt's accomplishments are still recognized as groundbreaking for psychology, and he is still considered its original pioneer, introspection was short-lived. Wundt had a student, though, by the name of Edward Titchener, who brought Wundt's theories to America and expanded upon them. Every experience can be broken down into its individual emotions and sensations. The example I use here is usually apples, so just take a minute and identify the different parts of an apple. Well, we start with the core, the stem, we have the skin, the flesh, and the seeds. You can't have an apple with just the skin or the seeds. To have a full apple, you must have all of the parts, but each is separate. He looked at the structural parts of the mind, and he called this structuralism. It is the theory that the structure of conscious experience could be understood by analyzing the basic elements of thoughts and sensations. Now, structuralism faded rather quickly as psychology expanded in the United States, and it was replaced with something called functionalism. Functionalism was actually promoted by a guy named William James, who was considered the father of U.S. psychology. Because psychology was a new science, James never actually took a psychology class, but he was the first to run a psychology lab in the U.S. He promoted psychology through writing and teaching, and actually published the first psychology textbook called Principles of Psychology. James believed that people work, play, and adapt to their surroundings. This theory was heavily influenced by Charles Darwin's idea of natural selection. So let's go back for just a minute to our example of the apple. Instead of looking at the parts, let's look at what is the function of the apple. What does that function depend on? If we are hungry, well, we can use that apple for food. If the wind is blowing, and we can use it as a paperweight. During the fall, I love using apples and decorating at my house. If a mountain lion is attacking you, and you had an apple nearby, you might use it as a weapon and throw it at the lion to scare it away. Get the idea? It all depends on our surroundings. Again, this was called functionalism. It studies how consciousness changes according to the environment. So, by the early 1900s, Wundt, Titchener, and James had put psychology on the map. But it was another pioneer, Sigmund Freud, who made psychology a household term. You may have heard of this guy. His ideas are collectively known as psychoanalysis, which emphasized unconscious mental activity and the long-lasting influence of childhood experiences. Freud was an MD in neurology, and early in his career he began to specialize in what he called nervous disorders. These were basically aches and pains which doctors could find no biological cause. He found that when people revealed thoughts and feelings that had previously been hidden, like painful childhood experiences, these symptoms improved. The discovery of this talk cure led Freud to two historic ideas. The first, the existence of the unconscious. These were thoughts and feelings in which a person were unaware of. The second idea that he discovered was that of what he called psychoanalytic psychotherapy, which was designed to make the unconscious conscious. Now, we're going to talk more about Freud in further chapters, So why don't you join me in the next slideshow to learn about the 7 modern-day perspectives that we use today to explain behavior and mental processes.